All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of, I guess, 3 Elite Specialization preview streams for Visions of Eternity. I'm Cal Cohen, joined by Taylor Brooks.
Hello.
Names that no one really cares about, but they're on screen if you choose to read them. How's it going, Taylor? You excited?
Going pretty well. Have 3 super cool Elite specs to show off to everyone. Super excited to, display what we've been working on in the past bit of time.
I hope you have water ready to go, because
I do.
For anyone, a bit of history, the last time we had Elite Specialization previews was for End of Dragons. The very first week, it was incredibly smoggy in Bellevue, and I sat on a stream coughing and drinking water for like 2 hours as I was talking about Elite Specializations. And hopefully we can get some good water screenshots in this stream as well. But we are going to kick things off today with the Troubadour, Luminary, and the Gale Shot. Obviously, we had a little teaser video earlier this week. We had a bit of an intro blog that went over some of the high-level ideas, high-level mechanics, some of the lore as well. Today, we're going to be covering everything about all the specs. You're going to see all the skills. You're going to see all the traits. You're going to have developers explain some of the thought processes behind those skills and traits. And, we're going to do this the next few weeks until we've covered all 9 Elite specs, setting up for the beta event where you guys are going to be able to get your hands on these. All 9 specs will be playable for about a week, and make sure there's plenty of time to check everything out, try everything out. Because I guess the big thing to keep in mind here, and even as we're talking and showing stuff on stream, is that these are still getting ready for beta. There's a lot of balance work we're still being done internally ahead of the beta, so some numbers might look a little weird, a little too low, a little too high. That's totally expected at this point. Even for the beta, we're not going to land perfectly. We've obviously seen some pretty crazy numbers on betas for some of the weapons in the past, Elite specs in the past. The big goal is that we're going to get everything in a playable state, get players, get all your hands on it, give us a ton of feedback, and we're going to have time to action a lot of those important pieces before the official launch of the expansion. Tell me about the Troubadour.
The Troubadour. Let's see, talked about how its gameplay loop's going to be a bit longer and have a more sustained presence in normal Mesmer. And then Chronomancer was kind of the de facto support. We're going to be kind of shifting where some things live onto the Troubadour. We'll get into that a bit more later, so that Chronomancer can kind of regain its old identity, and Troubadour can kind of step in. So a lot of the ways it supports allies are more intentional and can hopefully lead to better gameplay. But then the first thing, we can zoom in. I think, looking at the UI is the first thing you'll notice. Talked about notes. They're going to fill up at the bottom bar there. Again, there are no clones. Some of the reasons, we had multiple reasons for doing this. The first one was just that we wanted kind of people to focus more on keeping their instruments up in that gameplay loop, interacting with Crescendo, rather than having to worry about their clones being killed. And managing them, stuff like that. Also, in some game modes like World v World, when it gets larger scale, we want support Mesmer to definitely function, and we saw that when you're playing a Chronomancer that has clones, a lot of the time you can't depend on getting a high shatter count. So we want to make sure that this spec feels good to play and you're not fighting your mechanic, and it just does what you want. But going from the notes, like I said, they fuel the instruments. It's going to be a bit different from normal shatters. Normal shatters, they basically scale however many clones you have. Like if you do a mind rack with all 3 clones, it's going to do a lot more damage than 1. Instruments are going to be a bit different. When you play an instrument, it's going to be an initial effect, and this initial effect is constant. It's going to be the same whether you have 0 notes or 3 notes. And what's going to be different is that when you use it, the instrument will kind of float in the background, giving those bonuses like I talked about, and the duration in which it does that is scaling based on the notes. So you want to build up notes so that your loot is there for longer. And basically more notes will have better bonuses so that you have bigger windows to do things like strike the Crescendo or use some of the utilities that we'll get into.
Yeah, so notably, it still counts to 3. They're just in groups of 2 notes. So you get 3, still have a total of 3 here.
Right.
But there are 6 things that are filled.
I believe the notes are actually on a scale and do play a little tune. If those who are musically inclined want to look into that, then that would be pretty cool. But
Okay.
The note, it's three notes, like 3 clones. We wanted that kind of be similar to normal Mesmer.
All right. Should we hop into some skills?
Yes, we can look at the skills.
I'm just gonna start pressing buttons. Let's press
Yeah,
the
so
first
talking
one.
about the
What's
loot.
going on here?
First one, you're going to whip out the loot and do 3 waves. All the instruments are kind of replacements, like normal shatters. So this one's going to be the mind rack. It's going to be the more damaging one. When you do it, if you have no target, these waves will just go out in front of you, but you can use a target, it'll kind of lock onto them. So this is just your damaging skill, your mind rack equivalent that you can see here that there are some baseline bonuses for that loot. We'll get into more. A lot of them are going to come from traits. So pretty simple skill. It's going to be the one you're pressing often. And then we can move on to the flute.
Probably I am going to be doing a lot of cheating on this stream, so no cooldowns are active, but you can see on skill facts and tooltips that there are real cooldowns on these skills. But yeah, tell me about the flute.
The flute, that's going to be kind of your cry of frustration equivalent. You're going to fluster your enemies with a note from your flute. It's going to do a wave in front of you, confusing people. And it's also going to have a sweet spot in the middle where it's like, middle of the hitbox. If you hit them, you're also going to get a short daze kind of interrupt. We wanted to give the skill a bit more utility. A lot of the time, the cry of frustration equivalents aren't useful in a lot of the builds. So I wanted to give it something a little extra that, even supports want to use it, even, power DPS wants to use it. So it should be a pretty good skill. And then we can move on to the drum, the deafening drum. This is going to be your diversion, the CC skill. You're going to slam the drum, do a wave out, and the wave will have kind of scaling effects based on how close the enemy was from you. So you want to be pretty close when you land this for the strongest effect. At the close range, you're going to stun them. Then a bit farther out, it's going to lessen into a daze. And at the last range, that daze is going to taper off into just a lesser duration. So this is kind of, again, the CC skill you're going to get value out of this kit that, all Mesmers have. And then we can move on to the harp. So the harp the harmonious harp is going to be your healing skill. The first thing you can notice is that it does not just give distortion baseline. I think Cal has...
I have some traits on.
Cal has a trait on, we'll get to that, but this skill baseline doesn't provide distortion. We wanted this spec to, instead of having a high cooldown invuln like a lot of Mesmer specs have, we wanted to do it lower cooldown, more sustain that you see from a lot of supports. So it's going to, when you use it, do a burst healing, and then over time just do some more pulse healing. This is going to, again, low cooldown, healing your allies, what you want to do on more traditional healing support. And so
There's
all of
more
those
skill
skills
here.
Yes.
Or are you gonna say something else? You gonna say something else?
No. You will notice that these all are the instruments, and then the 5th skill, the F5, is a bit different. This is the crescendo that we've been talking about. So when you use the crescendo, you're going to kind of have a warm-up where you're going to conduct all your instruments to kind of strike a chord at once and release a wave of energy. It's going to deal damage to enemies and also grant your allies barrier. And the effect of this will scale based on how many instruments you have. So it's going to get, right now, 25% better for all of the effects based on how many instruments. So if you have all 4 instruments up, it can potentially get double the effect of this. And it's going to get additional effects based on traits. You can see that it's going to also give Might and Fury based on a trait per instrument you have up. And, ends up being a pretty flexible skill. That's kind of like your bigger payoff. But yeah, that kind of comprises the core of the profession loop. Again, building up the notes, using your instruments. I think you can probably aim to have 2 or 3 instruments up with like a correct rotation. 4 if you're really going for it, to get some powerful tide swinging effects out of these skills.
Maybe I just mash all my buttons with 0 notes so that I can crescendo. Yeah. Probably not ideal, but it is an option available to you.
Yeah, you can, use all your instruments at once to get that strong value immediately, but then you do lose out on having those instruments be up for the longer period of time. As we're going to see from the traits, there are bonuses that just come with these instruments being behind you. So we can go into the utilities next, before we go into the traits. So the utility type for this elite spec will be tails. They're going to be kind of vocal things, just like shouts, where you're going to say a message when you use them. And these tales are all based on the Legends of Tyria. They're specifically focused more on lore and heroes you've known from Guild Wars 2, rather than like, Revenant has like Guild Wars 1 things, but this game, it's been around for a long time, so we're going to talk about the heroes that you all know and have played with as your adventures through the game. So as I said, they're kind of like vocal skills, just like shouts. When you use them, there's going to be an additional effect. So you can hover over the tail of the Soul Keeper. This one's based around the Almora Soul Keeper. It's going to grant offensive boons to your allies. And then you can see each of them have a performance bonus, which is kind of the little hook. And basically, all the utility skills correspond to an instrument, and they get stronger while that instrument is playing. So Almora is corresponding to the lute. So if you use it while the lute is playing, you'll grant some extra notes to yourself, so you can get some other instruments playing. And then we can go into the other ones. Next we have the Honorable Rogue, which is going to be Dougal Keen, the protagonist from the well-known, amazing Ghosts of Ascalon book, that I'm sure everyone is aware of. He's a super cool character. But this one, he is a thief, a rogue. His daring adventure is going to make everyone faster, remove conditions, and also grant endurance. And he corresponds to the drum, so if that's playing, you can also give some super speed to your allies. And then the last one, or not the last one, the next supportive one is going to be the Tale of the Valiant Marshal. It is going to be
people recognize this character.
Your defensive shout based on Traherne, another amazing character. It's going to give your allies protection, resistance, break, stun, pretty powerful defensive effects. And if you have the harp playing as well, it's also going to give your allies barrier. And then the last skill is actually going to be an offensive ability. It's going to be the Tale of the Tortured Mastermind, who is another person that, we talked about this in the blog, Scarlet Briar. This is going to be a more targeted shout. You're going to almost mock your enemies viciously, one might say. Kind of targeting on them, summoning those laughing clockwork night heads on your enemy. And it's going to pulse 4 times. The first pulse will leave them weakened, then you'll leave them vulnerable, then it will strip boons, and then the last one will daze them. And it corresponds to the flute, so when you have that active, it's going to apply additional torment per pulse, and also do some extra defiance damage for, PvE situations. And something about, I'm hoping you're hearing them as Cal's playing, but when you play these tales, like I said, they have spoken lines. Each of them have about 4 that'll play in order. So as you fight with them and use them, it'll you'll hear a poem that your character will say. And I'm sure, it'll be on the wiki that everyone correlates, but, pretty cool narrative work from the team. And, nice little stories you get to hear about these characters that you've, played through in the game. We can also go to the heal, Aurene, we showed that one off. It's going to be a chunky heal for you and your allies when you use it, and its performance bonus, it's going to, instead of corresponding to a specific instrument, it's just going to care about how many instruments you have up. And so when you use it, if you have 2 or more instruments, you're going to apply this Scion's Reprieve buff to your allies that's going to increase the incoming healing that they get from all sources, including the heal. So, definitely want to make sure you have 2 instruments up before you use the skill to get pretty good value. And then we can move to the elite skill, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about already. This is the Tale of the August Queen, based around Queen Jenna's protection of, divinity's reach in the living world. And its effects it's going to give distortion and chaos aura to allies. And Distortion Share to allies has a storied history in our game, and we are aware of its potential. But we also think that Distortion Share is probably a peak power fantasy for support Mesmer. And we definitely wanted to try it again in a spec that's focused around it. And we're hoping that putting it on an elite skill, where it has an adjustable duration, adjustable cooldown, and some additional effects we can also weigh against its power, will leave it in a state that it is, possible to be in our game. We definitely don't want this to be how it is before, where it's very oppressive, but we do think that, trying it out and giving it an opportunity to be in the game and kind of elevate support Mesmer and what it's doing is just pretty interesting to us. So
how likely do you think it will continue to give AoE distortion by launch?
We will see in the beta. Maybe it does the classic, goes to blur and then blur is too strong. But this is all, betas are meant for testing. And again, this is something that we really want to do the super cool thing. And so we're going to try the super cool thing. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out.
I think there's definitely going to be a lot of things like that we'll see throughout a lot of these elite specializations, where there are, I guess, some aggressive ideas or some very wild ideas, you might say, and not all of them are going to work. But we think that's what betas are for, trying out cool stuff, and sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, and we're going to fix the things that don't work. So if AoE distortion on the elite skill here is going to break the game, it will likely go away.
Yep. And we can also see that has a performance bonus of its own that's also, I think, pretty strong. When you use this skill, you're going to bring up all your instruments for a duration. Baseline pretty short, just 3 seconds, but that duration is going to scale based on how many instruments you had before. So if you use it when you have no instruments up, they'll all come up for 3 seconds, but say you had 2 instruments up and then you use it, they'll all come up for 9 seconds. So giving you value when you use it, even if you had a lot of instruments up. This is another way to use it to get like a quick crescendo, get all your instruments up for, those buffs that they give, to kind of also balance out that, distortion can be powerful, but this can also be another powerful effect that you can use for a different reason.
Perfect for me, who just wants to press all my shatters and then press the elite, get maximum duration.
So those cover all the utilities, so we can now move into the traits, and I'm sure everyone's just so excited to see.
All right. And I'll do one last hover over of everything before we swap to the next spec. So I'll let you guys know when to get your print screen buttons ready for all those screenshots if you haven't been keeping up already. But we'll put some random traits on so it doesn't do the flashing thing that everyone really loved the last time we did elite spec previews. All right, where should we start? Minor traits?
Yep, minor traits. So the very first one is just going to be the basic minor trait that just gives you access to everything, doesn't really do anything, as it just explains what the Troubadour wants to do. But then we can move to the master minor, which is going to be harmonize. This is going to be pretty simple. You're kind of already saw it in the tooltip. It's going to cause your instruments to give increased outgoing damage and healing. It's going to be the first kind of minor bonus for just having those instruments up. You just get stronger. Then we can move to the Grandmaster minor, symphonic resonance. This, again, you saw from the tooltip. Crescendo grants affected allies boons per instrument playing. So this can, again, scale the Might and Fury based on how many instruments, kind of just playing into what you want to do with Crescendo. Then both the Adept and the Master tier kind of have themes to them. They're going to have 2 instrument traits and then 1 kind of generic value trait. So we can see that if we go into the Adept tier. The first one is going to be Mayhem. Your flute, all the instrument traits will have 2 effects. The first one will kind of augment what the initial effect when you play the instrument does, and then another one will give you an additional bonus for having that instrument playing behind you. So we see Mayhem, and it causes your flute to additionally apply Torment, make that condition burst just a bit better, and then while the flute is playing behind yourself, you'll heal yourself when you apply Condition or Torment. This trait is aimed more to open world gameplay if you want to be more of a condition duelist in competitive modes, just giving you a bit more sustain and damage for playing a more condition, torment, confusion bard or Troubadour. Then we get into the middle trait, where we have Hold the Note. Crescendo extends the duration of boons to nearby allies. Boon extension is another core Mesmer fantasy that we have before on Signet of Inspiration, but now we're having it on this trait where you have to choose between some of the other effects. Again, powerful, making Crescendo even more powerful. I would say these specs did have in development names that, even as developers, we have to work to say the correct terms. And we get to the bottom trait where we have Syncopate. This is going to be the drum trait. When you play the drum after a delay, it'll release a quick wave where you'll also do a shorter days, just additional CC on top of your skill, and give you a passive that when the drum is playing, you'll deal additional damage to enemies you disable. And so this is kind of an effect that we see on traits like Bunker Down or Lightning Rod from other from other specializations in the game. This, Mesmer has no shortage of CC skills, so just gives them some extra value here. So this can be a DPS trait or also just generic support trait for more CC. Moving on to the master tier, we have the first one is the loot trait Shredding. This augment more damage. It'll cause your loot to deal more damage per wave. So the first wave will deal normal damage, second wave will deal 25% more damage, and then the last wave will deal 50% more damage. So making sure you really want to hit those, especially at the later ones that come out. And as well as a passive, it's just going to give you a pretty good big damage increase while the loot is playing. So this will be a DPS spec. We'll want this trait compared to the others in this tier. It's going to be pretty important to keep your loot playing as it's a pretty big damage modifier. Then we can move to Raconteur. This is, again, the generic trait. It's going to be, the trait that affects your elite specs utilities. This one will augment the tails. When you use a tail, it'll grant you a note and then also recharge the corresponding instrument. So like if you use the Amora, it'll recharge the lute. If you use the Dougal one, it'll recharge the drum. And it'll also give you a lesser recharge for the heal and elite. Since they don't have a really specific instrument, it's going to recharge all of them, but just for a lesser amount. Then lastly, we can move on to Love Song. This trait is going to affect the harp. Kind of did what you saw before where it causes the harp to get you distortion. So, the Troubadour doesn't have distortion baseline, but this trait is kind of an option for the more supportive builds that want it to kind of ice into it a little. And then PvE, this is also where you're going to be applying some alacrity and regen in all game mode, or regen in all game modes. PvE will also give alacrity, kind of getting those important boons out while also getting some sustained healing with your harp. Then we can move on to the Grandmaster traits.
You want to start in the middle, though, the Grandmasters, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the first one, just call and response, we already talked about in the blog post. When you use an instrument at the note threshold, you're going to create an after image that will play the same instrument after a delay. After image here basically means phantasm that's not a phantasm. It'll appear in the world, but it won't be targetable, and it won't give you a note when it goes away. We didn't want you to get a free note when you're already requiring notes for this. So that's why we kind of created this new type of illusion. But as you can see with what Cal's doing, as you get those notes and you play the lute, it'll spawn and then play the lute again. So it can double the CC from your drum. It can double the healing from your harp. It can also, just get you more damage. So pretty versatile trait. We can move on to the bottom trait, Altered Chord. This trait's going to focus around crescendo. It's going to have two effects. The first one is just whenever you use an instrument, it's going to reduce the cooldown of crescendo a bit. And then it's going to have an additional effect that cares about the instrument you played right before you press crescendo. So crescendo's effects are going to be augmented based on the instrument you played last. So kind of the gameplay around this trait is you want to be using your instruments as much as possible to get more crescendos out, but it also wants you to make sure that you know when you're about to crescendo so you can keep an instrument to get the right bonus. Again, giving you kind of varied utility from this. You can get more healing, more CC, just depends on how you want to play. And lastly, we can go to the top Grandmaster, which is Fortissimo. This one's kind of going to try and alter how you use crescendo in general. The first effect it has is going to give you an attribute bonus for having your instruments up, and this stacks. So if you have 2 instruments, it'll be 10%. If you have all 4, 20%. That's a pretty big number. And it's going to cause crescendo when you use it to get you a note per second for a duration. So right now it'll give you 6 notes pretty rapidly. So instead of, normally you want to use crescendo as your finisher, you want to use it as your opener here. So you're going to crescendo, then it's going to give you a lot of notes. You're going to get your instruments. So this gives you a lot of note generation. So you can have, have the possibility of having 3 or 4 instruments up for a high duration to get value out of that attribute increase.
Definitely set up the elite pretty well as well.
Yes. I think that covers it for the traits. I mentioned before talking about, Troubadour and Chronomancer, fitting them into supports, but kind of readjusting where things live. I think while we're doing traits can show off like an example of that is Bountiful Disillusionment. Before, stability was put on the distortion slot, and it was pretty powerful, especially with Chronomancer's ability to double that and things being instant cast. So we're shifting around the bonuses back a little, putting regen back on that F4 slot and changing the F5 slot to be stability. to kind of give Troubadour better access to that and have specific things that the Troubadour can be better at than Chronomancer, and in turn, hopefully going back in Chronomancer and strengthening up its identity that we had to, take a bit. We had to remove a bit of it when we added support things because it was just very powerful, especially with C-Split. So the goal is that we can put more things in Troubadour's kit so that Chronomancer can be what it wants to be again.
And the goal again, is that Chrono will still be viable as a support build, right?
Yes, very much so.
Won't be able to do all the things that it is able to do.
Yeah. That kind of covers it for the
anything
overview.
Else?
I think, hover over all those traits, make sure people got, screenshots.
Get ready for your screenshots. We'll do all the traits, then all the skills. Surely Taylor will fill the air as I hover over these things with his new and improved microphone.
No, I just need more water.
Probably need more water.
Yep.
What's your favorite skill on this profession?
I think my favorite part of the profession is definitely crescendo. I really like the warm-up, the spotlight effect. I think the VFX team was they did a really good job on that, highlight that even more. First thought, I just couldn't stop using the skill. But I think all the instruments, kind of the concept of being, a one-person band, you're a Mesmer taking your illusions to have all your instruments playing behind you instead of leading other people, so you can be your own concert and be your own be your own conductor. That's kind of the initial idea that went behind all of these skills.
We're almost done. Could probably go way faster. The chat is all on top of these screenshots.
Yeah.
Just give them 1 pixel and go back in the pod. And the Valiant Marshal. What's the last one?
And again, I'm gonna plug the book Ghosts of Ascalon, Dougal Keane. If you don't know who that is, very good book released. I have my own copy. Cal has his own copy. Because we're just such lore heads.
Taylor's definitely more of a lore head than I am, but do my best. All right, I think that's everything. So we can move on. I'm going to switch back to this screen while I get set up on the next character. We'll be showing off Luminary next. Let's see here.
The opening statements on the Luminary.
Opening statements. Yeah, obviously you guys saw the video of the Luminary. We have kind of
Never have too much treasure.
what do we call it, a brazier. There's been so many words that we've called this power source of the Luminary internally that I just want to make sure I get the right one. But we kind of have this Guardian elite spec, for lack of a better terminology, because we're going to see a lot of things that really play into that Guardian protective playstyle, and we've kind of seen a lot of different shifts with the Willbender being a lot more mobility, and then Dragon Hunter being more of that ranged character, Firebrand obviously being the super powerful support kit, that are all kind of adjacent to what Guardian typically is and thematically is. But the Luminary kind of leans a lot heavier into just normal Guardian themes while really elevating them, because we saw in the video we had the Radiant Shroud set up over here so we can come back. Radiant Shroud giving access to these weapons of light and flame to the Luminary is kind of this just really Guardian, for lack of a better word. Well, we can see here that this wasn't quite clear in the blog post, and some people were kind of confused, it seemed like. We do still have the core virtues here available to Luminary, and that was a pretty deliberate decision as we were thinking about, well, we knew we wanted to do the Shroud pretty early and have, the access to the different weapons. There's the question of whether or not we should do, Luminary specific virtues as well, because we obviously have like Dragon Hunter gets its own virtues, Willbender gets its own flavor of the virtues, Firebrand replaces virtues with tomes. But the core virtues are actually play pretty well into what this spec is trying to do. We have like a lot of that protective, defensive, supporty Guardian here on top of like the more bruisery, aggressive versions of Guardian. And, you know, like Virtue of Resolve, Virtue of Courage, these are just like really skills that fit really well into this style of play. And there's some additional virtue hooks that we'll see once we get into the traits, but it's going to play really well with the virtues trait line. And so we felt pretty good about just having the core virtues alongside the new flashing mechanic of the Radiant Shroud. And this is something that we covered pretty in detail in the blog, but I'm just going to reiterate for everyone. The Radiant Shroud, the idea here is that it's like a different take on, say, Death Shroud or, you know, Shadow Shroud. It's kind of closer to like Photon Forge, which a lot of people realized, where there's not like a gating resource. Holosmith obviously has heat. The difference here is that the usage of the Shroud skills is what's going to be affecting the cooldown. So anytime it's available, you can just go into Radiant Shroud. And you can just show that off real quick. You can see that the power source kind of gets consumed to apply like the Radiant Aura here and really source the power of all of these weapons. That's kind of the idea. So that'll go away when you're in Shroud, it'll come back when you're out of Shroud. But when we go into Shroud, we can see that the base cooldown here, if we don't do anything, it's going to be 5 seconds. And that's also going to be true of the first weapon that you use. The base cooldown is still going to be 5 seconds, and then it's going to go up by 5 seconds each time you use an additional weapon skill. The way it's explained is slightly different because it actually reduces the cooldown, but you know, fundamentally, the cooldown is lower the fewer weapons you use. And most Shrouds, you don't have that 10-second cooldown, so if you go in and use a couple of weapons, you'll have access to more of that normal Shroud cooldown, but there's more space to have a really big burst of power, because we see here going in, and we'll cover all these skills again, but come in, use the hammer. That's going to be your main damage focused weapon. Then like the staff's going to be a little bit more supportive. It's going to create a symbol on the ground, have some healing attached to it as well. So a lot of these things do have like some situational value. Some of them are going to be the ones you just always want to press. You always go in, use that button, get that value. These skills do still have cooldowns, so you can't just, you know, go in, press the shield block, leave, come back in 5 seconds, press the shield block again. But you kind of have a decision point every time that you go into Shroud of how long do I want to stay in here, how many weapons do I want to utilize, and then that's going to affect like the next time you can go back in. So there's definitely going to be cases where you just want to pop in, use the hammer, maximize your damage, leave, and then come back 5 seconds later. Maybe you want to use the block is a situation that came up, so you want to have better access to that. But fundamentally, it's a resourceless Shroud that the resource is, I guess, the skills themselves, because the more you use the skills, the more the cooldown increases. So just going over these real quick. One extra thing here we're going to see is that there's a few extra buffs getting applied from the minor traits, so we can cover those real quick. The first one is a buff that we're calling the Luminary's Blessing. This is just a small strike damage reduction that's going to be applied to you and nearby allies every time you equip a Radiant weapon, so not the flip skills, but any of the base skills. And then there's also going to be this passive attached to each weapon from the Radiant Armaments Grandmaster Minor that, in this case, we see with the hammer, it's going to be more focused on damage, so you get a buff that says increased strike damage to crowd-controlled foes, immobilized foes. And that's going to persist for a bit of time after you exit Shroud. So when you go in and you're going to be using multiple weapons, if I'm more of a damage-focused build, I'm going to make sure that I want to end on the hammer, because that's going to give me that lingering bonus that is the increased damage. The auto attack is going to be a similar, it's just going to be like kind of a burst of energy around you. The interesting thing here is that it's going to be a different effect based off which weapon you have equipped. So if you have the sword, you're going to get a little vulnerability on top. Hammer's going to be the most damage. Shield's going to give some resolution. Staff, you're going to give some regen. And potentially a little bit of like a small heal attached to the more defensive ones. And then the bit of damage attached to the more aggressive ones. So we can go into these a little bit more in depth now, starting off with the Dazzling Hammer. This is Again, your most offensive slot. We see kind of starting with the overhead slam. All of these start with what we vaguely call an equip skill, where I perform an attack while equipping the weapon, and that's going to flip the slot over into the follow-up skill, Shining Spin, which is just going to be an AoE damage skill that deals increased damage against disabled foes. That's going to be a pretty common theme. We'll see that in a couple other places as well, where this spec's really going to be looking for those moments of opportunity where you're going to land an immobilize or land a crowd control and then really be able to unleash a lot of damage. Next up, we have the Luminous Staff. This is going to be that staff. It's going to give you a healing. We'll cover all the passives again once we get into the traits. So this is going to be an outgoing healing buff. The idea is you slam the staff into the ground. This is going to create a resolution symbol. And it's also going to grant protection to your allies when you use the skill initially. It's going to give some prot. And then the resolution symbol is going to go out. And that's going to flip over into Restorative Glow. This is going to be a AoE heal, AoE condition removal, and it's also going to give a bit of that strike damage redirection that we've seen in a few places before. It's going to be a little bit smaller, 10% redirected from your allies to yourself. This one has kind of a safety valve built into it, where anytime that you take damage, while this effect is active, if you fall underneath 50% health, it's going to remove itself from you, so you won't be able to just, one-shot yourself by applying this buff to your allies in like a worldly world environment. But it's just going to be like that extra layer of damage reduction to your allies. Next up, we can take a look at the sword. Let's get some close-ups on these weapons actually real quick, because these look super cool. The art team really crushed it. I mean, they crushed it with like all the specs, but I'm just really a big fan of like the art that came together for the Luminary. You can see the hammer there, the staff here. Just looks super sweet. We'll see a lot more of these models on some of the other skills as well. Stay tuned. Next up, we're going to look at the sword. We start with Gleaming Blade. There's going to be a bit of mobility. We leap in, do initial slash, do some cripple, do some vulnerability. That's going to follow up into Lucent Thrust, just a quick sword stab that's going to immobilize movement impaired foes. So a pretty natural combo. You leap in, apply cripple, and then you potentially land an immobilize, which can then play into like your hammer CC, hammer damage. You do equip both the sword and the shield anytime you use either of the sword or the shield. Just because it looks way cooler. Like, it just looks way cooler to have a sword and a shield equipped than to just have a sword or just have a shield. But you will only get the passive of the skill you actually use. So here we get the sword passive, which is going to be an increased movement speed. So this is, again, that more mobility-focused slot. You can leap in, leap away, and then get a little extra burst of speed to chase down your enemy or run away from your enemy. And then last up, we're going to take a look at the Radiant Bulwark. There's just going to be a channeled block, nothing too crazy, but it's also going to give an AoE Aegis to nearby allies anytime that I use that skill. So a little bit more of that situational, shareable Aegis to just be that powerful defensive moment. And that's going to follow up into the Brilliant Slam. There's just going to be a quick shield bash. That's going to daze, pretty short duration daze. It's going to be more of that interrupt value, just another layer of crowd control to potentially set up your hammer skills or your future skills. So that's the Shroud mechanic, and I think I covered all the things that I wanted to cover, so we can hop into the utility skills next, and I'll come back and do another pass on all of these tooltips at the end as well. So starting things off with the Resolute stance, kind of a common theme, but not a theme that is true of all the stances, is that a lot of the stances are a bit more unique in what the stance effect is. Here you see that Resolute stance is when you remove conditions from yourself, you get a little bit of extra healing. And the idea is that all these stances have some sort of AoE component attached to them as well. So when I activate this, it's going to do an AoE heal and AoE condition removal. And the effect that happens in an area, whether it's an offensive or a defensive one, we'll see a couple different flavors. But this is going to be playing into that stance effect, because I'm going to apply the stance to myself that says heal when I remove conditions for myself, and then do a pulse of AoE healing and condition removal, which will then trigger the stance, assuming you had conditions on you. So as you get like kind of one trigger for free, and then the rest of your kit is going to allow you to get additional triggers. Obviously, there's a lot of Condom Rule in the rest of Guardian's kits, other skills, other traits that can give you a lot more healing pulses if that's something that you're interested in. can really kind of level up your healing skill through that. Next up, we have Stalwart Stance. This one's a little bit more straightforward because we kind of put one of the more powerful AoE components on it. This is going to be an AoE stun break for yourself and allies. Also going to grant AoE Aegis again, so another really powerful button for especially for support, but you know, personal stun break, personal Aegis, and then that personal damage reduction. Just a pretty potent defensive tool. And as mentioned, you know, this one doesn't have quite as much flavor, but is just that solid, stalwart defensive tool that is also pretty valuable to support builds. I'm actually going to skip over this one real quick. We'll come back to it. That's one of the more offensive focused. We'll cover the two defensive focused ones first. Next up, we have Valorous Stance. The stance here is that you heal allies when you grant them boons. So this is pretty similar to like altruistic healing, but instead of every time you apply a boon to anyone you heal yourself, it's anytime you apply a boon to someone you heal them. So this obviously does include yourself. The number hasn't been balanced yet, so the 37 probably a little bit on the low end, but we do want this to be like a pretty powerful effect. It obviously gives stability and protection, these powerful defensive tools. Sorry, I got distracted by something else. But we see protection, stability, and then that's going to be healing these allies as well. I'm going to deal some damage to this. We see a bunch of heal pulses coming out, and then, I mean, you guys know how good altruistic healing is with like Empower, right? So you can now use Valorous Stance, use Empower. That's potentially a lot of AoE healing, in addition to a little bit of stability, a little bit of protection. This one's not a stun break because we feel like it has the potential to be strong enough, like assuming the healing number is right, this skill will be powerful enough that it doesn't need to be the stun break. And, you know, maybe you just want to play it alongside Stand Your Ground as well, get even more stability. There's potentially a lot of stability access with this spec that we'll see as we get into the traits as well. But just really leaning into like those powerful defensive boons that Guardian is so well known for. Next up, we have Effulgent Stance. This one's kind of a mix where it has some defense and some offense. So the first thing we're seeing here is that it's going to give some AoE Barrier, AoE Light Aura. And then it's going to give us a buff that is basically a charge up counter for this explosion that happens at the end. So we see the kind of this swirling aura. And this is going to stack up anytime an enemy strikes you or anytime you strike an enemy. And that's going to increase the damage of this final explosion. And if you reach the stat cap, so it's like there's a maximum of 10 stacks. If you hit 10 enemies or get hit 10 times or a combination of any of those things, this big explosion at the end is also going to do some daze. Probably not super likely in a 1v1 situation. Guardian does have a lot of multi-hit skills, so it is definitely possible, but more expected that you're going to get that maximum value in like these situations where you are able to cleave multiple enemies. But the baseline of the skill of that AoE Barrier, AoE Light Aura, which will be relevant once we get into the trait line as well. Potentially really fun and powerful skill. And last up, we have the Piercing Stance. This one's going to be, again, a bit more offensive and a bit more crowd control focused. So we're going to see it's just a quick AoE daze, kind of lash out with this burst of weaponry. And the stance itself is going to be another damage bonus against crowd controlled or immobilized enemies. So we see, you know, short duration days, not going to give you as much opportunity to unleash like a huge burst of damage, but maybe your next skill is going to line up with this 1.5 second daze. Then obviously it's going to give you bonus damage off of any of the other crowd control you're going to be inflicting with the skills. And as usual, skills with or enemies with Defiance bars are always going to be susceptible to this, or always reward you with this bonus damage. Last up, we have Daring Advance. This is, I like to call this one kind of a loose interpretation of the stance skill type because it is more of a mobility skill. And we're going to leap to an area, and it's not going to give you in particular a buff, but it is going to create this area of power that is arguably the stance, where this is going to be applying Might, Fury. It's going to be pulsing Luminary's Blessing as well, so we're going to see like, make sure I'm not going to die when I do this, but we can see like as this buff gets reapplied, you're getting that healing pulse because it's anytime that it expires in any way, whether it is by timeout or by refresh. That's also relevant for the Shroud, because if you are using those skills back to back to back, you will get that refresh on Luminary's Blessing, which will trigger the healing. So this is a pretty powerful like Pretty powerful area. A lot of defense and offense attached to here. We're also going to see that if we leap in and we strike enemies, it's going to do a tether on these enemies. That it's a little different from like the DH tether or the Spellbreaker tether. This one is going to be just a stun if you get too far away, but the range threshold is a little bit shorter. So the idea is that, you know, the stun is a little bit harder to avoid, but it's not quite as powerful as getting pulled back. And it will, again, set up some of your skills that care about striking crowd-controlled foes. And I'm just going to use this skill a few times because the art is fantastic. I love this area. It's like the arena of weapons. You are free. It's not a ring of warding naturally, but you have the tether attached. You can just walk out of it. You might get stunned, but it looks very cool, very threatening. And it's also a light field, which is cool because you can get some light aura. We also have the light field on the staff skill, Radiant Staff skill. Light aura will be relevant as we talk about the traits here in just a second, but I'm going to take a quick break for water. And we see some nice temporary icons, Blast from the Past. These are not quite hooked up yet, so we have some nice Roman numerals for you guys, for anyone who remembers back in the day. All right. Let's talk about some traits. So as with all the elite specs, this is just kind of the minor trait that explains the profession mechanics and all those things. But starting with the trait that actually do things, we've kind of seen both of these already from using the Shroud skills. Light's Gift is going to be a little bit of extra vitality buff, and then this is going to be the source of Luminary's Blessing. Every time you equip a Radiant weapon, it will do this to allies in the area. This duration is going to be a little bit shorter in competitive modes. Here we see, you know, it still needs a tuning pass. Right now it's 6 seconds. It's going to be about 3 seconds in competitive modes. But again, the idea is you get this kind of short duration of strike damage reduction, and then when that ends, it's going to give you a little bit of healing. That's obviously true for all of the allies that you affect with it as well. And then we see the bonuses here from Radiant armaments. Every time while you have an equipped Radiant weapon, you're going to get a passive bonus based off which weapon you have equipped that will linger for a little bit of time after exiting Shroud. So we see again here the hammer, bonus damage against crowd-controlled and immobilized foes, staff giving you that increased outgoing healing, sword with the increased movement speed, and shield giving you that incoming strike damage reduction against nearby enemies. Moving into the adept traits, we have Shimmering Stances. Here we're going to have the stance trait for the spec. Obviously, we see some stances that affect allies, some that affect enemies. So stances that affect allies will also get protection bonus here, and stances that affect enemies will inflict blind. Some of the stances do both, so you will get kind of both of these bonuses attached to those stances. Pretty powerful trait, assuming you have like a decent number of stances on your bar. Next up, we have Shining Restoration. This is kind of the first of the middle row of traits that are going to be Light Aura adjacent. And so here, this one's pretty straightforward. When you use a healing skill, get an extra Light Aura. Light Aura in itself, you know, increased Condi damage reduction. Not the most exciting, but not too weak, and we're going to see a lot of Light Aura synergy as we move down the trait line. Next up, we have Persistent Blessing. This is going to give you a quick refresh of Luminary's Blessing when you exit Shroud. So, you know, go in, use all the weapons that you want to, and then as you're exiting Shroud, you're just going to get a nice little refresh on that duration of that damage reduction and get an extra healing trigger as well. So more of a defensive trait if you don't have a bunch of stances equipped for Shimmering Stances. Next up, we have Steadfast Recovery. This is a personal sustain trait. It's going to give you a pulsing health regen if you have protection or resolution. Starts off with a smaller number than other things that we've seen, like Rugged Growth, for example, because it is going to count twice if you have both of these boons. So if I have protection, I get this 120 heal pulse that obviously scales with healing power and all that jazz. But if I have prot and resolution, then I'm going to get twice as much healing every pulse. Obviously vulnerable to boon removal, but if you are maintaining protection and resolution, you can potentially get a lot of sustain from this trait. Next up, we have Purging Light. Every time that you apply a light aura to yourself, you're going to do an AoE condition removal for you and your allies. we're still trying to find the right balance on this one. If 1 is enough with kind of the amount of light aura that's added to this spec. Obviously, Core Guardian has a lot of light aura sources as well. But now we're adding like more light fields, more elite finishers, a lot of extra triggers of light aura. So this might not be strong enough at 1. It could be 2, or maybe it could be 2 for yourself, 1 for allies. You know, there's a lot of knobs here that we can balance this trait with. But the idea is grant light aura, remove conditions from allies. And last up, we have kind of more of a damage focused trait here. This is going to be empowered armaments. So every time that you equip a radiant weapon, it's going to give you kind of this duration stacking damage buff that we've seen on a number of specs and professions at this point. But every time that you use a radiant weapon, you'll get additional duration of this. So this is another incentive to use more weapons each time that you go into Shroud. Obviously, hammer is going to be the main damage focus. Staff is going to give you that symbol, which will be relevant for symbol traits, and you know, also be a reasonable amount of damage once we get the number right. And sword's obviously going to have a decent amount of damage attached to it as well. So there is already some incentives to use more weapons, but here's another incentive to use more weapons, is to get more damage. Then we're going to start in the center. That seems to be a trend for this stream, starting with a middle Grandmaster Major trait. This is the Sovereign of Light. It's kind of a play on the King of Fire's trait that Berserker has in name and in functionality. So we're going to see another light aura trigger here that if I have this trait equipped, when I enter Shroud, I'm going to get a light aura. And then all of your Luminary skills, so that will be Radiant Shroud skills and Stance skills, will detonate that light aura, and that's going to do some AoE damage, it's going to do AoE healing, and it's going to give some AoE resolution as well. We can see we pop in, use a hammer skill, we're going to get a little bit of a light aura explosion there. And, you know, it's going to be hopefully a reasonable amount of damage, reasonable amount of healing. Resolution, pretty relevant for all the Guardian traits that love resolution. So an interesting trait if you really want to lean into like that, kind of like a middle ground bruisery playstyle. We're going to have some damage, some defense, and some support. Potentially an interesting trait selection. If you're going to be more of that boon support, then Illuminating Inspiration is going to be the trait that you want to take. Here we see grant boost to nearby allies when you use a virtue skill, and then reduce the recharge of your virtue skills when you equip a radiant weapon. So this obviously is going to be all of your virtue skills, granting alacrity in PvE, and it's going to be something a little bit different in competitive modes. But then you can go into Shroud and use some radiant weapons, get some cooldown reduction, and that's going to then give you access to like more boons. And you know, reducing the recharge time of your virtues is even better when you have other traits that care about virtues, say from the virtues trait line, potentially a really strong trait for like those supportive guardians that, you know, that's more Indomitable Courage procs, more Absolute Resolve procs, more of the just all the boons, all the triggers from virtue traits if you have this trait equipped and utilize all of the skills in your Shroud. And last up, we have kind of the flip of the alternative to recharging your virtues by using your weapon skills. Now you're going to recharge your weapon skills by using your virtues, and this one's intended to be a bit more offensive focused. I mean, obviously recharging staff is going to be good for support builds, but you're going to lose access to some of those boons and some of those extra virtue triggers. This is intended to be more like a bursty trait where using virtues are going to give you a full recharge of the radiant weapon skill. So here we see that if you use Justice, that's going to fully recharge your hammer. So I can go in, use hammer, use Justice, use hammer again, and that's not gonna, the cooldown is still gonna be based off each unique weapon that you use. So if I go in and I use hammer twice, or even 3 times if I use, say, renewed focus and recharge my Justice and then do it all again, that's still only gonna count as 1 weapon used for the sake of the cooldown reduction. But you can see that we can get some pretty bursty moments if we go in, use all these skills, recharge them all with the virtues, and then, you know, we can do it all again with renewed focus if we really want to. So you are the master at arms. You get to use all the weapons really as much as you want. Well, not as much as you want, but significantly more than builds with different traits. And, you know, pretty fun to play with, and potentially very powerful DPS trait. So I think I got through everything. So we're just going to do some hovering of things for just a minute here. We'll go over all the traits again, and then over all of the skills again. Right. What do you think about Luminary, Taylor?
While you're doing that, question, what roles do you think, the spec will see in the game? Like, how would it play in PvE or maybe World v. World?
Yeah, so it's definitely going to have access to, alacrity. So we do expect, especially a DPS alac build to be relevant for PvE. Obviously, the pure damage build for sure. I think we definitely want to see like some more of a supportive role as well. It might not quite reach the level of like a pure healer, but we see like all the boon access that it has access to, a lot of stability, a lot of protection, a lot of these like core defensive boons. So it might not be like as much of a pure healer. Obviously, you can still spec into like as much of a healer as you want with your other traits and your weapon selections and your skill selections. It might not reach the level of some other support builds, but it is going to be like a decent middle ground of like great boon access, good damage, more of that like bruisery playstyle, and then a lot of powerful defensive boons.
Yeah, I think people have been asking for a long time. A lot of Guardian specs take Guardian in a different way, but I think kind of a more traditional, stalwart figure with a sword and the shield hasn't really been represented as much as people would like for Guardian. So I think, the spec trying to step in those shoes, correct?
Definitely. You can enter Shroud a bunch of times because keep expiring. Get another close-up of these weapons because they just look so good. Gleaming Blade. Loosen Thrust. Not sure I lingered on this one quite long enough. And then the utility skills, healing skill, and elite skill. Yeah, I think there's a lot of fun traits, especially in the Grandmaster slot. Like, obviously, recharging cooldowns is always really fun and really powerful and really scary, but we see like a couple of cooldown reset traits. And even like, I've been having a lot of fun internally, I think, with Sovereign of Light, just leading into like the full, how many light auras can we get? How many times can we detonate light aura? Just like a lot of burst healing, a lot of burst damage. It's pretty fun to play with. Fulgent Stance. We're just about done here, and then we can move on to the Gale Shot.
Gale Shot. Know everyone. A lot of excited people for that. I'm excited to show it off.
All right, I guess I can hover this one too. Seems important. All right, I'm gonna move back to this scene while we get set up for the Gale Shot. Do you want to start rambling about Gale Shot, Taylor?
Yeah, I can just talk a bit about, background of the Gale Shot and some intro to it.
I achieve. I'm an achiever.
So if you read the blog post, you know that the Gale Shot, it is kind of an archer spec. You're going to get access to this new weapon called the Cyclone Bow. If you talk about design goals, part of Ranger's identity is definitely being a bow user with marksmanship. I think a lot of people, when they first start playing the game, some people like to gravitate toward the archer characters, and so Ranger is kind of that for them. But then when they got to elite specs, there wasn't really one that elevated that fantasy. So that's what the Gale Shot's trying to do, is kind of be that signpost spec for if you really like playing archers in games. There's a lot of archers in our game, but Gale Shot is like the one that's highly focused on that fantasy. So, part of the Tyrian Alliance, the Tengu are teaching Rangers how to control wind magic and be even better with their bow. So you're going to see a lot of mix of like the archery, the wind magic, and some bird aesthetics, because that's always fun. So that's kind of like the initial idea and why we decided to go with the Gale Shot. So again, now we're in game, we can talk about what it is. I think when you first look at the UI, you can see a new F5 skill where you go into the bow and see you have these feathers that are your arrows. These are kind of going to be your resource for the spec. Continuing with the UI, when Cal will use the skill, you see it takes an arrow, and you have a meter where you can see the time until your next arrow. So you're not guessing. You have the recharge there. And another thing you can notice is that Cal doesn't have no recharge on, but the bow doesn't have a recharge. The bow is something that you can always have the option to go into. This is something that we felt was important with the Archer Fantasy, is the ability to always have something to do at range. So the auto attack also doesn't cost any of the arrows. So wherever you are, you're able to auto attack with the bow. Obviously, this is very strong. Competitive mode is going to keep that number probably low, but in like instance PvE fights, if the boss jumps away, you always have the option to swap to your bow. And that's something that's just one thing that spec brings that's kind of different from if we just made, a normal weapon that's gated by weapon swap, is that, you could have a longbow, but even there are times where you swap to your other weapon set that you don't have anything to do at range. So that's kind of a gap that the spec is hoping to fill.
It's okay, because you should just swap to your short bow from your longbow, and then make sure you have bear pets as well. That's the key.
And then, so going on to the mechanics of the bow is that as you see Cal use skills, he'll get this buff on his bar that's called Wind Force. Wind Force is kind of, you build stacks of it up to your payoff. If you hit 5 Wind Force, you'll unlock what we call the finale skill Hawkeye. That's intended to do a lot of damage and hope for you to cycle through your skills. It plays a lot like a kit, and we've seen through a lot of gameplay, especially like Engineer and sometimes Firebrand with these like no cooldown abilities, is that the optimal playstyle is to go and press the good button, then leave. We wanted the Cyclone bow to have more interactive play than that. So that's what Hawkeye is intended for. You want to wait for your cooldowns, wait to have enough arrows to go into this kit to get that big payoff, but you always have the option to go into the kit if you need to use that evade backwards, or you just want to auto attack some. Maybe you have enough arrows that you can do a few blusters before you go back to your weapon. So it's aiming to be fluid and always have options to support this range play style no matter what's happening around you.
All right.
So
talk through the skills.
Talk about the actual skills.
What is Bluster that you just mentioned?
Bluster is the 2 skill. This is kind of your bread and butter skill. Has a really low cooldown, costs 1 arrow, so you're going to be weaving it in a lot. Just quick charge up, then quick burst. Pretty simple. Nothing too crazy about it. Then we go to the 3 skill. This is going to be Fleeting Zephyr, your defensive. Wanted to make sure the weapon has at least 1 defensive in its kit. So you're going to do a leap back and evade. That's always useful. But you're also going to release a gust of wind, and that wind is going to be a pretty big projectile destruction. Part of being good at range is being able to trade in range. So if there's another person that's shooting at you with a projectile, you have the ability to use that to stop a pretty big important incoming attack, and also use it to protect your allies if you see a lot of projectiles incoming. The next skill is going to be Quarry's Peril. This is going to be a ground target. You shoot arrows up, and then after a delay, they rain down, and it's going to immobilize people. Going to do some okay damage, but hoping the immobilize is the main aspect, so it'll kind of lead into your other skills. You can Quarry's Peril, then hit them with a Bluster, or when we get into the 5 skill, also use that, and just some ranged poke that is not affected by projectile denial, because that's a big part of every world that we know, so we want to make sure that you have ways to interact that aren't just through normal projectiles. And then we can get on to the 5 skill, which is kind of another capstone skill. Supersonic Arrow. It's going to be very strong. It's going to take a lot of arrows, but hopefully worth the payoff. You're going to stand still and channel, and then shoot a really fast arrow. I think I set this projectile to some insane number. It's almost instant, basically. It's going to do pretty heavy damage, CC, unblockable pierce. It's a very good skill, and one that if you're fighting a Gale Shot, you want to definitely see coming and evade. This is also something that you can line up with Quarry's Peril, and then use the Supersonic Arrow. And part of the payoff for being such a high arrow cost is that it's also going to give you 2 of those Wind Force. So you can get to your Hawkeye even faster if you choose to use it. Then, just talk about Hawkeye. It's, intended to be a pretty high damaging skill. The payoff for using all these weapons, or all these skills while you're in the kit. And its functionality is basically, you're going to use it on a target, it's going to lock onto that target, and then shoot 5 arrows at them, and then it's going to look at if there's any nearby enemies to them, and shoot 3 arrows to them. So it's potentially a lot of arrows if you have a lot of people near them, and kind of like a cleave arrow ability. So that's kind of like the core gameplay loop. Go in, use your arrows, come out, and as we talked about in the blog post, mobility and swiftness, being mobile and controlling The battlefield is also part of the spec, and that's going to come through more of the utilities, so we can get into those. And the utilities are going to be squalls, which are basically small bursts of wind magic that are kind of like cantrips, but cantrips already exist in Ranger, so these are windy, small wind magic effects. The heal is going to be pretty simple. You're going to heal yourself and give yourself super speed and cleanse some conditions. It's a very basic heal, but does what you want. There'll be a couple super speed tie-ins when we get into the traits, so that's pretty good, but it's just, good value, what you want from your heal. We probably have seen this, but I want to make sure people know that there's no weapon restriction on Gale Shot. The F3 is just like an addition, so you're gonna have 2 weapons normally, plus the bow. There's no locking your skills. So now, wanted to make sure, because I saw some confusion over that. So then we can go into the more utilities. There's kind of like 2 offensive ones, 2 defensive ones. We can talk about the offensive ones first. The first one is Piercing Gales. It's going to be pretty simple, just damaging abilities that you want to fit into like a rotation in PvE or use for additional poke. You're going to shoot 5 projectiles that pierce, kind of like in a pattern to make an X formation that I think looks pretty cool. And as it says, it's going to pierce. These projectiles inflict vulnerability, and then its baseline going to get additional damage increase from vulnerability. So if someone has 10 stacks, you're going to get the 10% bonus from vulnerability, but also deal an additional 20% damage. And then another tweak to the skill is that it's going to fly faster, the arrow or the wind magic projectiles, if you yourself have swiftness or super speed. So it's kind of trading with someone if they know the timing for it, and kind of throw in a bit of a tweak, give yourself some swiftness, and the projectiles will come at them a bit faster, so they have to react differently. And then the second utility that's going to be offensive is called Mistral. This skill is intended to be a payoff for having a lot of projectiles, using things like longbow, using like Axe 2. You're going to create a screen of freezing wind, and then as you shoot projectiles through the screen, they'll get frozen, which will chill the enemy they hit and deal additional damage. So this has the potential to do a lot of additional procs of that damage and chill, has the potential to do not that many, so you really need to plan around when you're going to use the screen. Put it up right before you're going to Hawkeye, use the Piercing Gales through it. If you rapid fire it, it's going to be, plus 10 extra procs. So this is a way to encourage, some more bow usage in the elite specialization outside of like just having the normal Cyclone bow.
Also works with any projectile skill, right? I can use my axe and throw some axes through it.
Yep. Then we can move on to the defensive utilities. The first one is going to be Wind Shear. This is just a quick knockback around you, a swell of wind. It's going to, like I said, knock back enemies, stun break you, and then it has a very short projectile reflex. So if you see a pretty important one coming, again, having that, edge over range trades, you can reflect that back at people. Then the last skill is going to be Whirlwind. This is going to be a completely mobility-focused skill. It's ground targeted. You're going to leap through a whirlwind, evading while you're leaping, and then grant yourself a burst of super speed. This is going to be important, if you're a long-range character, you want to position yourself well in fights, so this is going to be an important tool for that. Just quick bursts, movement speed, short evade, get yourself where you need to be to, be in the best position in fights. And then, we can get on to the elite skill, Perfect Storm. You're going to charge up, throw a tornado in a direction, and then where that tornado lands, it'll grow larger and kind of deal ticking damage for while it's there. So it's a DPS skill. And then when you throw the tornado, it'll launch people along with it. And kind of the special part about this skill is that the launch is variable. It will launch them towards where you target the tornado to land. So you can target it right in front of you, and if you launch an enemy, they'll launch just in place right in front of you. But if you target it all the way out, the tornado will kind of carry them with you and go a really long launch, and then the end goal is that they'll always end where the tornado ends, so you can get that taking damage on them. All right, so then we can move on to the traits.
All right, traits.
Yep. All right, starting with the minors. The first one, just as always, just explains the spec, the teaching of the Tango. You can see there that arrows have a 5-second recharge time to start. Obviously, things can be tweaked like that. It has a tooltip for Hawkeye. Then we can move on to the Master Miner, Bird of Prey. Strike damage is increased while you have Swiftness or Super Speed, and Swiftness is more effective. So this is an ore, so if you have Swiftness or Super Speed, it doesn't stack. But you're just going to get a damage bonus for the things, like using the heal, get the Super Speed, some Swiftness procs, and the trade line. And just making yourself faster in general, as a spec wants to do. And then we can go to the Grandmaster Miner, Jetstream. It's just going to give you a base movement speed increase. We see a lot. Just even if you don't have Swiftness or Super Speed, going to move faster. And then Hawkeye will grant you Super Speed. Sometimes you need to commit a lot to get that Hawkeye bonus. So this is going to make sure you get that Bird of Prey when you're using it, and also just a burst of movement speed to reposition after having to invest into it. We can move on to the Adept here. The first one is going to be Joy of Movement. This is just simple bonus onto your Squalls. When you use them, you'll remove a movement pairing conditions. Those can be pretty deadly, especially the spec when you get chilled, immobilized, pretty vulnerable. So you have this trait so that when you use your Whirlwind, it'll remove immobilized, so you can still get out, or just make sure you're staying on your feet with this trait. Then the next one is going to be Feel the Rush, which causes movement skills to grant you swiftness and endurance. Movement skills really good with this elite spec. Sword, great sword. They're not ranged, but they have good gap creators, gap closers. So using this, you're going to feel the wind as you rush through it. It's going to give you some swiftness to stay up with mobility, and also a bit of endurance to keep you defensive if you're using those movement skills to stay in like melee range, for example. Then last we have Wuthering Wind. It's going to add an additional proc to when you bluster your pet's next attack. It's going to create just small damaging swell around the target. So it's just additional damage on the bluster. It is AoE damage, give it a bit better cleave, and have some interactions with your pet. Bluster has a couple other interactions in the spec, so this trait has a potential to proc a decent amount, and it's just some additional damage if you want that from this tier. We can move to the Master tier. And the first one, we have Flock Together. This is the one we talked about in the blog post. Avian pets have increased strike damage and health, and beast skills grant quickness around the ranger. This is a pet trait like you see we've been adding to the core traits. This was actually the first pet trait. We really wanted birds to have a tie-in with this spec. It was very thematic, with the wind and the Tengu and all. And so we created this idea, and we were also be like, wait, this is cool for all the pets. So we kind of reverse added them to the core lines, but this one was actually the real one. So it's gonna, again, make your birds. It affects Phoenix, it affects Moas, things with feathers. It's gonna make them deal increased damage and also grant quickness around the ranger. Along with another Grandmaster trait, we're gonna try and have the spec do a quick DPS in PvE as an additional role as to just normal DPS. So probably want this trait to make it easier. But we can go on to, the next Master tier. It's going to be Perilous Skies. This is going to cause Quarry's Peril. That was the 4 skill in your Cyclone Bow to be replaced by Pelt. Pelt is pretty similar to Quarry's Peril, except a couple of key differences. It's going to get 2 ammo, so you're going to be able to use it more. It's only going to cost 1 arrow, but it's going to eschew that immobilization. So basically, you can get more damage out of this slot, better poke, and like situations for Worldly World, but you're going to lose that powerful immobilize. So it's kind of a trade how you want that skill to be used. More uses, which means faster Hawkeyes as well. And again, Quarry's Peril will have additional bonus, so this trait will get better. Let's talk about one of the Grandmaster traits. And the last Master trait, is going to be Fetch. This is going to be just value off Pet Swap. Pet Swaps can be interesting traits for a burst of, just a burst effect. It's going to give you 2 arrows back. Arrows normally have 5 seconds, so you have to wait a bit of time to get a full combo back, but you can take this trait if you want to speed that up a bit, catch people off guard if you just need some arrows to use the lead back or something. Pretty simple. Then we can get into the Grandmasters. And these are all, the theme of the Grandmasters is they're all going to tweak how you play the bow, what its exact gameplay loop looks like. You can start with the middle again. Go for Gale Force. Gale Force is going to augment your Wind Force stacks, which were the things that you built up so you can get Hawkeye. It's going to give them a small movement speed and damage increase bonus. And then when you use Hawkeye, it's going to convert these wind forces into a stronger bonus for a short period of time. So the goal here is that you kind of have a normal gameplay loop with your Cyclone Bow, and then after you finish it, you're going to get almost a Sikkim type bonus to go into like a weapon skill type burst. So you use this, and then you go do your Whirling Defense, go do like a Rapid Fire. It's just carrying that moment of power farther into your normal weapon skills. Then we can go to the top one. This is going to be Cloudburst, kind of where I was talking about some synergies between it and the other skills. Corey's Peril and Supersonic Arrow, those are going to be the 4 and 5 skills, are going to reset the cooldown of Bluster. And then when you use Bluster or Hawkeye, you're going to give boons to nearby allies. These are quickness in PvE, it's swiftness and fury in the competitive modes. But basically, we want the value for there to be on the cooldown of Bluster. But it's going to change kind of the cadence. Where you use 2, then you use 4, 2 again, 5, 2. Kind of get a lot faster of a Hawkeye going. You don't have to wait for cooldowns longer, so it's going to kind of condense it. And then also be the option where you're supporting your allies. This will also work off the Perilous Skies. You're going to get 2 pelts, which is 2 recharges for your blusters, which procs Wuthering Winds. So going like diagonally, a lot of synergy in the line. Then we move on to the final Grandmaster trait. It's going to be Shrike. The goal with Shrike is it's just for people that want to stay in the bow as long as possible. It's going to trigger off of missile hits, and missiles are just like projectiles, from your bow, from your axes, what have you, things that fly through. Every time you hit someone, every 8 hits with a missile, you're going to shoot a volley of arrows, and also reach, store an arrow. It's basically as you're auto-attacking the bow, or you can swap to like a longbow, get a rapid fire. The whole goal here is that you have a lot of arrows so you can stay in the bow as long as possible for people that want to do that.
I recommend Lead the Wind.
Yeah, I think little bonus. When you're using your pet Cal, does it feel a bit more responsive to you? Almost.
It kind of does.
Almost like when you tell it to use an F2, it will do it immediately. Part of this spec and making sure things like Flock Together birds have long cast times. So has been a bit of an issue that for a while pet responsiveness wasn't great. You weren't able to interrupt their commands. We made sure that we went and fixed pet AI, that when you use a skill, your pet will obey you. So this applies to all ranger specs, Untamed, Druid, what have you. When you use an F2, your White Tiger will give you Aegis when you want it to. So we want to make sure that when the spec comes out and you're using those birds, they feel responsive like you would want them to.
There is some strange behavior when you are cheating and have no recharges, but I don't expect that anyone will run into that.
That covers it with the Gale Shot if you want to hop over
tooltip
to get it.
The final tooltip pass. So that's all of the elite specs we have for today. We'll probably be back next week with a few more, but you'll just have to stay tuned to learn what those are.
Yep. When the beta comes out, we're going to be looking for all the feedback you guys put out. We're going to have forum threads for each specialization as normal, looking at other avenues as well, other social medias, going to read all you guys say. The beta is for the feedback, what you guys like, what you guys don't like, number tuning, of course, the art, the audio, everything. So, we're just as excited as you guys are for you guys to get your hands on these things.
Yeah, and I guess we can just reiterate once again, because it's true that obviously things are going to be a little bit unbalanced, most likely. There's going to be things that need improvement, mechanics that are maybe a little crazier than they need to be and need to be kind of reined back in or changed. We've definitely seen, even with like some of the past non-elite spec betas, where we've been able to make some pretty significant changes to things based off player feedback, based off the results of betas, where some things just aren't going to work, and that's not what we're going for, but it's not something that is really a surprise. Like we're going to be trying some cool stuff, and some of it's going to need to be adjusted between beta and launch, and that is entirely kind of what we're expecting to do already?
Saw someone ask this. The Gale Shot bow will be available underwater. We actually have a harpoon gun version of it. Wanted to make sure all these spec mechanics would be available underwater, so you can play them wherever. So that shouldn't be a worry.
The Cyclone harpoon gun.
The Cyclone harpoon, maybe the water spout harpoon gun. I don't. It's available underwater and it looks.
It
cool,
works.
So all
And
that
it looks
matters.
cool. All right. We're almost done. Any final words, Sailor? Read Ghosts of Ascalon.
Read Ghosts of Ascalon. I think any PvP, the push beta is coming out soon. We'll probably reiterate that after the next stream, but keep your eyes out for that.
Yep, and of course, keep your eyes out for additional elite spec information. Next week's going to be a pretty similar pattern where we're going to have that initial kind of reveal video and developer blog post, and then we'll be back with another live stream where we show off the next heavy armor profession, medium armor profession, and light armor profession. So you guys can do some math to determine how likely it is that your favorite profession will be revealed next week if it has not already been done.
Yep. As always, stay hydrated and always leave messages that the stream isn't as good without Roy on it.
Not as good without Roy. Roy's on vacation or something, so he couldn't
busy
even
vacationing in Europe and having a good time, but
we'll see if we can't get Roy back to
yep.
Run some of these streams too. But yeah, that's all we have today. So thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you in the mists.
You in the mists.